In every city, there are streets the streetlights forget. Places where the fog doesn't lift, it settles. Into the bones. Into the records. Into cases no one wants reopened. They told her it would be simple. Walk in. Walk out. Don't look back. But nothing in this world stays buried. And everyone looks back, eventually. Some crimes don't end when the sirens fade. They send out waves. Through testimony. Through memory. Through the people who survive them. They reverberate.
Help me.
This is one of those cases. This is Reverberating Noir.
There is a street in New York City, 1941 years of history beneath its cobblestones. On one particular Sunday morning in the summer of 1841, a young woman walked out of a boarding house on Nassau Street, told her fiancé she was going to visit family, and disappeared from the world of the living. Her name was Mary Rogers. The city knew her face. The newspapers had made sure of that. They called her the beautiful Cigar Girl. And when she turned up dead 3 days later, floating in the Hudson River near Hoboken, New Jersey, that same press that had celebrated her in life would consume her in death. This is her story. Mary Cecilia Rogers was born in 1820 in Lyme, Connecticut. Her father was a sea captain. He died in an explosion when she was still a young girl. Just like that, the foundation of her early life, gone. Her mother, Phoebe, did what she had to do. She packed up the family and moved to New York City, where she opened a boarding house to keep them afloat.
And that move to New York, that's really where everything begins. Because around 1838 or 39, Mary started working as a clerk at a tobacco and cigar shop on Broadway. 319 Broadway, to be exact. Owned by a man named John Anderson.
And this wasn't just any shop.
Not even close. Anderson's place was a gathering spot for well-to-do young men, journalists, lawyers, professionals. The kind of men who shaped the conversation of the city. And Mary, dark hair, dark eyes, sharp wit, effortless charm, she became the reason people kept coming back.
They weren't coming for the cigars.
No, they were coming for her.
The newspapers picked up on it quickly. They started writing about her, calling her the beautiful Cigar Girl. In a city just discovering what celebrity could mean, that nickname carried real weight. Mary Rogers was, by any measure, famous. Genuinely, publicly famous. And yet behind that public face, her private life was quiet, modest even.
She was engaged to a man named Daniel Payne, a cork cutter. He boarded at her mother's house. By most accounts, he was reserved, serious, not particularly exciting. And there's something almost melancholy about that contrast, isn't there? By day, she's the most talked-about woman in Manhattan. By night, she comes home to a modest boarding house and a quiet man who cuts corks for a living.
Two lives running parallel, and never quite touching. Then, the summer of 1841 arrived, and something happened. Mary vanished for a few days. No warning, no explanation. When she came back, she said she'd been visiting a friend in Brooklyn. People accepted that. But historians who've spent years with this case believe the truth was far darker.
The evidence strongly suggests she underwent an abortion. Illegal at the time, dangerous in ways that are difficult to overstate. She needed time to recover. And she couldn't tell a single person why she was gone. That kind of secret, that kind of isolation, it tells you something about the impossible position women were in during this period.
Hold on to that detail, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. Sunday, the 25th of July, 1841. Mary tells Daniel Payne she's going to visit her married aunt and cousin. She leaves the house on Nassau Street. And she never comes home.
For a few days, just silence. And then panic. Payne and her mother start placing advertisements in the newspapers, asking for information. Begging, really. The city starts to stir. Where is the beautiful Cigar Girl?
Wednesday, the 28th of July. A young man named Henry Mallin is sailing near the shore of Hoboken, New Jersey, just across the Hudson River from Manhattan. Near a spot locals called Sybil's Cave, he sees something in the water.
They pulled her ashore, and within hours, she was identified as Mary Rogers.
What the coroner found was it was appalling. A piece of her dress had been stuffed into her mouth. To silence her screams, a strip of her petticoat had been tied so tightly around her neck that it had sunk into the swollen flesh. She had been strangled. There were bruises on her arms and body. She had been held down, beaten, and she had been violated before her death.
The conclusion was unambiguous. Mary Rogers had been murdered, and her body had been disposed of in the river.
She was 21 years old. Now what happened next was something America had never quite seen before.
The newspapers detonated. This was the era of the penny press. Papers like the New York Herald, the Sun, the Transcript, cheap, aggressive, hungry. And the murder of the beautiful cigar girl was the story they had been waiting for.
They ran the lurid details. They published outraged editorials. They speculated wildly. They competed with each other to be the most sensational, the most shocking, the most compelling. And in doing so, they created something new. They created the American true crime sensation. Mary Rogers, in death, became more famous than she had ever been in life.
And with all that attention came the theories. Daniel Payne was immediately suspected, questioned, scrutinized, and then released for lack of evidence. But the cloud never fully lifted from him.
Then there was the gang theory. Hoboken was rough territory. Some believed she'd been abducted by a group of thugs, taken across the river, and killed there.
And then there was the theory that wouldn't go away. The abortion theory. People remembered her disappearance the previous summer. They connected the dots. The suggestion was that Mary had gone to an abortionist, that something had gone catastrophically wrong, and that whoever was responsible had disposed of her body to cover up an illegal procedure. Names were floated. Madame Ristel, the city's most notorious abortion provider, was mentioned. A doctor named Richard Cook, who lived near the Hudson River, was named. But nothing was ever proven.
The police investigation, for all the public pressure and media noise, went essentially nowhere. The evidence was thin. Witnesses were unreliable, and the body had been in the river for 3 days. And that's when a writer in Philadelphia started paying very close attention.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe. He was following the Rogers case obsessively through the newspapers, and he saw something in it that no one else had seen. Not a tragedy, not a scandal, a puzzle.
In 1842, Poe published a story called The Mystery of Marie Roget. He moved the action to Paris, changed the names. Mary Rogers became Marie Roget. And he brought back his detective C, Auguste Dupin, to dissect the newspaper accounts of the real-life murder. Through Dupin, Poe was doing something genuinely audacious. He was trying to actually solve the case, in fiction, using real evidence.
And his reasoning was sharp. He dismantled the gang theory with cold logic. A gang of thugs, he argued, does not carefully tie a cord around a woman's neck. A gang does not go through the deliberate, methodical process of disposing of a body. That kind of calculated action points to a single person. Someone acting alone, someone with something very specific to hide.
He also analyzed the river currents and argued that Mary couldn't have been killed in New York and floated all the way to Hoboken. She was killed near where she was found. And then carefully, obliquely, but unmistakably, he pointed toward the abortion theory. A respectable man, a gentleman, perhaps someone with military connections, who had arranged an illegal procedure that ended in death, and then disposed of the body to protect himself.
The story caused a sensation all over again. Readers were riveted. Many genuinely believed Poe had solved a real murder through the voice of a fictional detective.
And here's what I think is the most important thing about that story beyond the Rogers case itself. The Mystery of Marie Roget is widely considered the first piece of detective fiction to apply logical reasoning to a real crime. The brilliant detective, the armchair analysis, the systematic elimination of suspects, the triumph of reason over chaos. Poe built a template in that story that eventually gave us Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot. Every detective procedural that has ever existed. All of it traces back, at least in part, to a young woman who sold cigars on Broadway.
If you're finding this story as compelling as we do, and we think you will, this is a good moment to hit subscribe on Reverberating Noir. Every week, we go deep into the cases that shaped history, the crimes that changed culture, and the stories that refuse to stay buried. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. October 1842. More than a year after Mary died, Daniel Payne walked to the woods near Sybil's cave, the same spot where her body had been found. He drank a bottle of laudanum, an opiate, and he died there. He left a note. It read, "To the world, here I am on the very spot. May God forgive me for my misspent life."
Was he confessing? Was he proclaiming his innocence one final time? Was he simply a broken man who couldn't survive the grief and the suspicion? We don't know. His death only deepened the mystery.
And then later that same year came what seemed like an answer.
A woman named Mrs. Loss, who ran a boarding house near Hoboken, made a deathbed confession. She claimed that Mary Rogers had come to her establishment and had died there following a botched abortion. Her mother and a doctor had performed the procedure. When Mary died, they panicked. They disposed of the body in the river.
It fit. It fit the location. It fit the persistent rumours. It fit the earlier disappearance. It fit the way the body had been found. For many people, this was the answer.
But Mrs. Loss's confession was never verified. The doctor was never identified. And the man who had gotten Mary pregnant, the man who had set this entire chain of events in motion, was never named. Was it a secret lover? Was it John Anderson, her employer? A naval officer? We don't know. We have never known.
Mary Rogers was buried in an unmarked grave in New York City. She was 21 years old. And I want to sit with that for a moment, because it's easy, in a story this layered, to get swept up in the theories, the suspects, the literary legacy, and forget that at the centre of all of it was a real young woman. A woman who worked hard, who smiled at strangers, who carried secrets she couldn't share with anyone, who deserved a long life. She deserved to grow old. She deserved better than the river.
And what her case gave us beyond the tragedy is a mirror. A mirror held up to a city that celebrated women publicly while offering them almost no protection privately. A city where an illegal procedure performed in secret was often the only option a woman had. Where the press could make you famous and consume you in the same breath. Mary Rogers' story isn't just a cold case from 1841. It's a story about power. About visibility without safety. About what happens when a society fails the people it claims to admire.
The true fate of Mary Rogers, exactly what happened, exactly who was responsible, exactly what her final hours looked like, remains unknown. One of the most enduring unsolved mysteries of the 19th century. But she is not forgotten. She never was. And the least we can do, all these years later, is remember her name.
Mary Cecilia Rogers. Born 1820, died 1841, and still unanswered.
Thank you for spending this time with us on Reverberating Noir. If this episode stayed with you, and we hope it did subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment with your thoughts on the case, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear this story. Because these stories matter, the people in them matter, and the truth, even when it's incomplete, is always worth pursuing. We'll see you in the dark.
And so the file closes. But the case doesn't. Not for the families. Not for the witnesses who still pause before answering questions. Not for a city that remembers, even when it pretends not to. The evidence sits somewhere in a box. The photographs fade. The names are spoken less often. But the echoes remain. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that silence at the end of each unanswered question, subscribe to the channel. Not for us. For the stories that never got a second look. For the voices that were cut short. For the cases that refuse to stay buried. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It waits.
And as long as the questions are still unanswered, the case isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to look again.
And here, it keeps reverberating.